They're not good enough to start. They're not even good enough to play. But they do talk a good game. So come join Lou and Jose from the sidelines where all the best sports discussions happen anyway. Welcome in to the Benchwarmerz podcast.
Welcome into the program, everybody. We made it to another week. I'm Lou Ruggieri, that's Jose Ortiz, and this is the Benchwarmerz podcast. Welcome in. We're glad you can join us. Happy to be here. Survived another week. A lot to talk about this week. Some NFC, AFC North. We're going to be ranking our division winners, who we think is we're actually going to be ranking division first to last later on, coming up with the Last Dance being out of the picture with Michael Jordan. ESPN has chosen to give us a Lance Armstrong documentary that I will admit, has sucked us in, and we're involved. So we're going to break that, for part one, we're going to break that down a little bit later. But first off, we're going to just kick off the show with a little bit of news headlines this week. And Jose, I just wanted to know, first and foremost, did you happen to catch the Brady Manning Tiger Phil golf match?
I definitely did not. I saw some headlines. I saw, Brady hit a birdie while splitting his pants or something like that. Mm-hmm. I guess I just wasn't one of the people who really cared that much. I thought it was an interesting matchup, being the gap between Phil and Tiger is probably similar to the gap between Peyton Manning and Brady, with obviously Brady being Tiger in that analogy, just in case anyone didn't get that. But, so I thought it was, certainly interesting from that standpoint, but I just didn't care. So I didn't really watch too much of it. So what about you?
I thought that, I didn't think I was going to care that much. I didn't think I was going to. I didn't watch the whole thing because I lost it in my head until later on that night, and I was like, oh wait, that was today. And then I actually actively did seek out like the highlights, with SportsCenter, and I kind of watched a lot, and it was interesting. I mean, I don't regret not seeing the whole thing from start to finish. I mean, the highlights were enough for me. I felt like I kind of got the feeling that Tom Brady struggled pretty early. And I got the distinct notion that Peyton is a much more polished golfer than Tom Brady was. And Peyton looked like a pro. I mean, he his pink shirt out there. I mean, he looked like he belonged on the putting green for sure. And Tiger, I felt like Tiger did well, but Tiger was almost lost in the whole thing. But Tiger played really well, and I thought that did bode well for his potential comeback in the future. At least I'm hoping, but. I also Phil Mickelson does have gigantic calves, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed that. Yeah,
I did not notice that. I feel like I've never really paid that much attention to Phil Mickelson. I don't know why. I guess it's because he's a golfer and he's not Tiger Woods. So it's just like, well, if you're a golfer not named Tiger Woods, why do I even care? No, I did hear that Tiger Woods played well, and as I was saying, that's what I care about heading into this next year. Whenever they do get started playing again, I just want him to get closer to Jack, and hopefully that bodes well for him getting another major this year.
Yeah, I feel like I already want to crown Tiger as the greatest of all time in golf, but I think that's partially a bias because I've seen Tiger play, and I think Tiger in that decade, arguably. He was the most dominant athlete in his sport for a decade, that maybe over anyone. But
no, absolutely.
I think his, just the total amount of championships is behind Jack Nicklaus. And obviously I didn't see Jack Nicklaus, so it's just.
Well, I think if you were, to put it for like football or basketball, something like that, his per game. Or his season average or his season performances for those 10 years were probably better than any 10-year stretch than Jack Nicklaus had. But as we always say, you and I, when we talk, longevity counts, and the totals matter as well as the averages. And while I think if we were comparing them as basketball players, Tiger Woods would have a much higher points per game total, but his career points wouldn't necessarily be where Jack Nicklaus is. And when you don't have all the records, then there's going to be some questions. So, he's got to get to 18 for it to really – I think if he maybe gets to 17, we can really start having the conversation. 18 almost definitely solidifies that he's the greatest of all time. So
yeah, he'll be the best, then he'll be unequivocally the best.
Yep.
Speaking of being the best, actually, I don't know if you saw this or not. We're just kind of hitting the highlights of the news this week. DeAndre Hopkins said to it was ESPN's Jalen and Jacoby show that he told them that he is definitely the best wide receiver in the NFL. I don't know if you caught that or not, but it kind of, I don't know, a lot of thoughts went through my head when I saw him say this. And I think, first and foremost, I think if he was on my team, I would want him to say that, even if it wasn't completely true. The other thought that went through my head is he might be right.
Yeah. It's not outlandish. It's certainly not an outlandish statement. He's one of the few, maybe 3 or 4 receivers who could even say that without being laughed at, right? You have
that's what I was going to ask you. Who could make that claim, and it wouldn't sound ridiculous?
I think Michael Thomas and Julio Jones are probably like the first 2 that came to my mind. I don't really know. I think DeAndre Hopkins is probably the only other receiver who's in that class. I mean, maybe Devontae Adams, but I don't think that Devontae Adams really, while he's been great, I don't think he's on that level. And Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, especially without Antonio Brown being at the top of his game, he's not even on the team right now. So, I don't think it's so outlandish. And I think one of the things he talked about, which really makes a lot of sense, is listen, Michael Thomas has had Drew Brees his whole career. Julio Jones has had Matt Ryan his whole career. I don't remember off the top of my head who the quarterback for the Texans was before Deshaun Watson.
I will tell you, actually. I have that right in hand. So DeAndre Hopkins was drafted in 2013. Since 2013, DeAndre Hopkins has had Matt Schaub, Case Keenum, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Ryan Mallett, Case Keenum again, Brian Hoyer, TJ Yates, Brandon Weeden, Brock Osweiler, Tom Savage, and then Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, no, it's so he certainly brings up a good. That obviously,
which
when
is
you've had that many quarterbacks, that means you didn't have that many good quarterbacks, right? Like,
it's sort of fitting that he's going to that he got traded to the Cardinals, because the other receiver who fits that mold perfectly is Larry Fitzgerald, who's had just as almost as embarrassing a cast of characters throwing him balls as DeAndre Hopkins has. I mean, I think outside of Carson Palmer and
that's it.
I mean, really.
Oh, and Kurt Warner.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I knew I was forgetting somebody. Kurt Warner.
Yep.
And Kyler Murray now. But I mean, that's, for somebody I think he was in the 2003, 2004 draft.
Yeah.
He's around almost 20 years. I think he could have made that claim. I don't know if he's that. I don't know if he's not the best right now, but I think in terms of like we're talking about longevity, I think Larry Fitzgerald is sort of he's almost like a modern day Jerry Rice. Like, he's not physically impressive, but his stats and just his ability to kind of make things happen.
I would say Larry Fitzgerald, he's not this type of guy, but what I would say he could say is, if I had Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and an MVP level Rich Gannon as my quarterback for my entire career, maybe I'd be the greatest receiver of all time. He's not the type of person who would say that.
No.
But if anyone has the ability to, has the positioning to say something like that, it would be a Larry Fitzgerald. When you look at his career and the laundry list of terrible quarterbacks that he's played with. Some of the just garbage. Ryan Lindley, I think, is one of them. Just terrible quarterbacks.
There's been some real bad ones. I agree.
Yeah.
But I think outside of maybe Julio Jones, it's Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, even though Beckham isn't really in that conversation anymore. He was. I mean, since he got traded, he's not really. I don't know.
To me, the best receiver in the NFL is Julio Jones. I mean, that's where I stand right now. I could see someone making a case for Michael Thomas. But to me, Michael Thomas kind of just arrived to this party that Julio Jones has been at for a few years now. And Mike
Evans, you put Mike Evans in that category?
I'd put Mike Evans in a tier lower. He's not in that upper tier, in my opinion. He's a great receiver, but he's not in that upper tier right now. Not
Tyreek Hill.
Ooh.
Yeah, I don't know.
Tyreek Hill.
He's not a great the thing with he's not a great wide receiver, but he's a weapon. It's not. He's just like a.
He doesn't get the volume that these other guys get.
Yeah.
as far as targets and receptions. So, like, he's very explosive. He certainly makes great catches and he gets open. I just feel like from just all aspects of being a wide receiver, which includes, blocking in the run game, making catches in traffic, making the acrobatic catches, being a red zone weapon. I like Julio Jones as my number one guy, but I think Tyreek Hill might be a guy who's maybe number 4 in that tier.
Yeah. Stephon Diggs comes to mind. He's so like spotty. I don't know. He's hit and miss. Devontae Adams, I think almost by default, because Aaron Rodgers has no one else to throw to. But yeah, I think Michael Thomas has got the best chance in that for sure.
Okay.
But I still think Julio Jones is better. Yeah. But speaking of, there's one more news topic this week that I think you pointed out to me, and that was Damian Lillard. Speaking of bests again in yet another league, Damian Lillard said that LeBron deserves the MVP over Giannis at this point. Now, he cited a bunch of sort of things that weren't necessarily statistics, because Giannis has a better scoring average and better overall. I think except for assists, Giannis has got pretty much better numbers across the board.
Absolutely.
But Lillard kind of pointed out sort of the way LeBron dealt with the Kobe death and how he handled that, and then there were a couple other things that he sort of brought in that were sort of periphery things that I felt like don't really reflect what the most valuable player necessarily stands for. I don't know if it was sort of a cumulative thing where it's just like, well, he's been great for so long, we'll just give it to him.
I think that he's trying to. We'd have to be fools to think that these writers or whomever is voting on the, the MVP award have no subjectivity when they're, it's not completely objective, right? There are all these other factors that would certainly weigh in, and I don't necessarily think the Kobe death should have anything to do with it, but I do think him being on a team where if you took him off that team, they're probably a lottery team. I think he talked a little bit about the load that he was carrying. I don't know if how old he is should be a factor in it, but it's hard to not think about it. The guy is, what is this year, 16, and is still basically, if not number 1 in the world, top 5 in the NBA right now, unquestionably. I think the answer is Giannis as MVP, and I'm a huge LeBron fan. Yeah. I don't know anyone who's a bigger LeBron fan than I. Well, that's not true, but I'm a pretty big LeBron fan, and I think he's had a great season. But Giannis has been otherworldly. I think I don't have his numbers in front of me right now, but the thing was like 30 points a game, 13 rebounds a game. He's got 2 block shots. I'm just going to pull his numbers up right now.
So while you're doing that, this was on ESPN's Jalen and Jacoby show again. They're just killing it this week. The quote from Damian Lillard was this. He said, if you said either one, I feel like nobody would have a problem with it. But me personally, this season, I think it's LeBron. They're the number 1 team in the West. They've been consistent all year long. For him to be at the age he's at, with the amount of miles that he has on his body, how often he's talked about the pressure they put on him in every little thing that he does, and the level that he's performing at, I feel like he's the MVP.
Yeah, and I think it is important to bring up that context. I forgot about that. I'm glad you repeated the quote there, because LeBron does play with a different level of pressure than Giannis does. And that's not even there's not even up for debate.
It's getting close though, because Giannis, Giannis was MVP last year. They were the favorites, and then they got beat by the Raptors, and Giannis got kind of got shut down by Kawhi Leonard, and I think that this year it's going to start being like, hey man, you're putting up all these numbers, but it's almost like the James Harden effect, where it's like, okay, great, what have you done for me lately? But not necessarily just that, but what have you done for me in the playoffs?
Yeah, and that's going to be a growing thing that comes with him. But LeBron is at a different point where he's chasing all-time people. Right? Giannis is chasing his first chance. Giannis is trying to stake his claim to being the best player in the game. LeBron is trying to stake his claim to being the best player of all time. Now,
that's a good distinction. You're right.
And so, it's just a different level of pressure. LeBron has the whole 3-6 in the finals thing following him around, needing to play with other stars, and I guess Anthony Davis is there. I do think there's a different level of pressure on everything that he does. I still think Giannis is the MVP, but I understand kind of weighing that in as far as a contextual factor because they're not playing. It's also Milwaukee versus LA too, right? So there's a different just element from geography as well. So
yeah, and I think that if LeBron ends up leading the league in assists this year, I mean, I guess it's a shortened season, so it almost detracts from that a little bit because it's not we can't see how it would rank all time. Mm-hmm. But to lead the league in assists at first of all at 6'9", 260 or whatever he is amazing. Yeah. To go from being basically a power forward his whole life to a point guard. He's not even like a point forward anymore. He's a legit point guard on the Lakers. I mean that I think gets a little brushed under the rug a little bit because that transition. I mean, it's not like it's. I feel like it's easier to go the other way where you're not the main guy on the ball, but then you're off ball a little bit more. But to go from being kind of like the big guy who's down low and outside to just being the guy, the point. You're the point. It's pretty impressive.
And I will say, and this tells you how good of a season Giannis has had. If in any year a guy averaged almost 26, let's just say for rounding up sakes, 26 points a game, 11 assists, and 8 rebounds.
Yeah,
I mean that's a remarkable year. 1.2 steals as well. Let's not forget that, and a half block shot per game too. So he's really all over the place. And you know what? They have been the best team in the West. And the Western Conference does seem like, at least in my opinion, it's a stronger conference than the Eastern Conference. So I still think the answer is Giannis. I think just, it's hard to get past the amount of rebounds and points he's putting up. I do respect LeBron's game and putting the 10.6 assists per game. It's close. I wouldn't have any issue with either, but I pick Giannis.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with you that much. Mm-hmm. But speaking of the conferences, the last thing I wanted to touch on before we go to break is we might not have any conferences coming up, and that the NBA is rumored to they have a couple different things on the board as far as what to do this season, and it looks like they're hell bent on getting the season done, the 2019 2019 season. What do you call it?
2019-20. Yeah. 2019-20.
Yeah. And so they're looking at just one of the things that they're doing that I thought was interesting, and I'm curious what your favorite is that they might just, because I feel like especially since LeBron left the East, I feel like the NBA's sort of been subtly trying to figure out how to just reseed the playoff structure so that it's just top, the top 16 teams, regardless of conference. So, we get to see the best teams play because, I mean, for the last how many years now that the best teams have primarily just been in the Western Conference. And I think that they're trying to use this, and I give them credit because the NBA, this is the perfect. The 2020, the year 2020 is going to be the year of the asterisk for everything in life, everything from top to bottom. So no one is going to say anything, especially if we are able to watch something as crucial and important as actual playoffs. So I think they're doing the right thing here, and I'm all in favor of this reseeding at least as a trial because as it stands right now, right. So here's kind of the rankings from top to bottom in order of schedule or in order of record, not as far as conference. So it'd be Milwaukee number 1, Lakers 2, Clippers 3, Boston 4, Toronto 5, Dallas 6, Houston 7, Utah 8, Denver 9, Philly, Miami, Oklahoma City, Indiana, New Orleans, Portland, and then Orlando is the 16th best team. So, you're talking about potentially, I mean, if you break this all down, we could have a Lakers-Clippers finals, which I think would just be, I think they would break TV. I don't even know what would happen. So, I don't know. What are your are you conservative like you traditionalist?
I'm feeling on the traditionalist side here because I want the leagues to stay. I want it to be the East versus the West, right? Like, I don't necessarily care, if they want to do some sort of play-in action within each conference to let certain teams in. I guess I would be okay with that. Personally, if it were up to me, I would just be coming back with the top eight teams from each conference. Mm-hmm. 3-week training camp, to get yourself ready to go and start the playoffs. Now, the players have said that they want to have a few regular season games, and it makes sense. I think you were the one who actually kind of opened my eyes to that a few weeks ago when we talked about this, basically saying you need to have a few regular season games just to kind of shake the cobwebs off, and I guess that makes some sense. But it just seems weird, though. If you're going to play regular season games, then they should mean something, right? So I guess you have to have some sort of play-in game. You have to have something that allows a team that's in the 9th spot or the 10th spot to get into the postseason somehow. But the problem is, because one of the propositions they have is to have 22 teams, basically every team that's within 6 games to come in, and there's only one team in the Eastern Conference that would meet that criteria, and so it makes it kind of difficult if you have 6 teams in the West that have a chance to get into the playoffs and one team in the East. Unless, now I would be in favor of somehow taking those bottom teams and doing some sort of play-in game and maybe one team. But even then, I just want to I want the Lakers in the West and I want the Celtics in the East. And that's just how I kind of want it.
But I mean, it would also be pretty special if they ended up playing each other in the finals anyway.
Yeah,
with the rankings where they were. But a little conspiracy theory: do you think that with that 22 team, playoff where any team within 6 games of the final playoff spot gets in? Do you think that this is the NBA's very clandestine way of trying to get a few more appearances of Zion Williamson on TV?
Well, I mean, I think that's their NBA's way of trying to get as many people interested as possible, right? If you have 22 teams, whether it's Zion Williamson or anyone, right? Yeah, that's 22 markets, right, that now have an extra interest in playing. Now, Zion Williamson is a star, but I don't know if it's necessarily about him per se, and just about, hey, let's get more games, let's get more teams.
The Pelicans are 28 and 36 right now, and they're sort of on the outside looking in. I mean, who are you watching? You're watching New Orleans Pelicans, or are you watching at 28 and 36 the Sacramento Kings? Same record. Who's getting your attention?
Certainly, it's the
Pelicans. Unquestionably, the Pelicans. It's probably the Pelicans over a lot of teams. I'm trying to go through the playoffs here. I mean, maybe not until you get to about Houston is there a team that I'd be more interested in seeing on TV than the Pelicans. And so I'm just there. I'm curious.
No, it's
not substantiated in any way, shape, or form.
It makes sense. I heard that theory out there, and it makes some sense. I think the NBA is interested in getting as many people to watch the games as possible. So maybe it is about Zion Williamson, but honestly, who would watch the Sacramento Kings over the Pelicans? People in Sacramento who happen to root for the Kings, right? And if you can get those people to watch an extra game or two, that's a win, especially because they're going to be relying on nothing but advertising dollars for the rest of the season, and maybe even the beginning of next season with the coronavirus. So, maybe it was a conspiracy to get Zion, but I don't think I don't think they're that smart.
I mean, at this point, I'll watch Cleveland and Detroit play. I don't care. I mean,
I would watch hockey right now. Come on.
Yeah. All right, so speaking of sports we actually want to see, coming up next, we're going to get into the meat of our show this week. And going back to the NFL, we're going to, we've been ranking divisions. We're trying to, first 1 through 4, we're giving our ranks and giving some reasons why we rank them the way we do. Last week we did the NFC East and AFC East, so this week we're going to do the NFC North and AFC North. And I'm guessing that we're going to have very similar layouts as with most people, but we'll see. But stick around. Come find us. We are on Instagram. We're on Facebook. The Benchwarmerz podcast with a Z. Oh, and Jose, I completely forgot all the big news this week, and that we are on. We got accepted to the iHeartRadio lineup of podcasting. So congratulations to us. We are also newly on Spotify. You can hunt us down, the Benchwarmerz podcast. So we're trying to, and we have a YouTube channel. How did I forget that? The Benchwarmerz podcast on YouTube. It's just the audio version of the show for now, but at least it's accessible. And so we're just trying to reach out on as many platforms as we can to get this show up and going however we can. So
yeah, it's very exciting. We're getting it. We're just growing and growing every week. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. All right, so stick around. We're going to come right back. We're doing our NFC North, AFC North division rankings. We'll be right back on the Benchwarmerz podcast.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Benchwarmers podcast, where being all talk is actually a good thing. Now, back to the action. Or talk, I guess.
Welcome back to the program. This is the Benchwarmers podcast. I'm Lou, that's Jose, and we are available on all sorts of social media. Like we said before the break, we are now new inductees of the iHeartRadio broadcasting lineup. So come find us. Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Jose, we're everywhere right now. The Benchwarmers podcast with a Z. You can even email us at thebenchwarmerspodcast@yahoo.com. Again, Benchwarmers with a Z for marketing purposes. And so now, Jose, we are going to start talking. We've been doing this, which I think is fun because we do this even off air. Yep. And rank the NFL divisions. We're going to rank them 1 through 4. I don't want to get into, I think we agreed we don't want to get into sort of specific division records, team records, because it's just annoying. Because if it doesn't line up and match up, then it's just sort of stupid, and it really bothers me when analysts have 6, 12, and 4 teams. It's like, okay, they can't all be 12 and 4 in the same, whatever.
Yeah.
So we're just going to rank them in order on what we think. This week, we're going to be doing the AFC and NFC North, and so I think we'll start with the NFC North, just because. And with that being said, who is in your? You want to do first to worst, right?
Yeah, we'll do first to worst, and so for me, I know that every year, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, 5 teams that made the playoffs last year will not make the playoffs the next season. That's just the NFL, the turnover, the postseason. So for me, the last year, the division winning, the team that won the division was the Green Bay Packers.
Yep.
But this year, I've picked the Vikings to win the division.
Really?
Yeah, I think they're an underrated team. They won 10 games last season. Kirk Cousins regularly puts up top 10 seasons. They have a great defense with Anthony Barr, Daniel Hunter, Harrison Smith. You know that I love the pick of Justin Jefferson in the first round to replace Stephon Diggs. They have Dalvin Cook. They have Adam Thielen, Kyle Rudolph. This is a team that I think is experienced, and they're ready to kind of take that next step to me. I don't think that they hit their ceiling last year. They certainly performed well in the postseason, but just as far as the regular season, I think there was a lot of meat left on the bone, and I'm expecting a kind of a 10 to 12 win year from them. I just think as a team overall, they're ready to take another step forward and take control of the NFC North.
Huh. Interesting. All right. Well, I actually have, I thought this was actually really hard for me because I think you might be right with the Vikings, but I think Stephon Diggs not being there, I mean, Justin Jefferson looks like he's going to be great, but I mean, Stephon Diggs is a proven great wide receiver. And Kirk Cousins, I'm still just not sold on him. And that being said, I picked the Packers to win this division again. I don't think it's going to be as convincing a margin as it was last year because I think that they were the most hollow 13-3 team possibly ever last year. I think they sort of resembled more of a 10-win team to me. But this year, I'm banking this on Aaron Rodgers being a little bit spiteful because I think he's going to prove something or try to prove something. And, they still do have a decent team. I mean, Aaron Jones led the league in rushing touchdowns last year. I mean, they drafted how many running backs or halfbacks? But Devontae Adams is a top 10 wide receiver easily. The rest of that team, however, is a little bit lacking. I mean, they added Devin Funches, who, I don't know, maybe is a 2. or a 3, depending on how Marquez Valdez Scandling does. I mean, who knows? Equiminius St. Brown, not so much. Lazard, Alan Lazard he looked good for a minute. I mean, and for somebody who's like 6'5", 225. I mean, he's got some talent, but I think that the strength of this team is going to be exactly what Matt LaFleur wanted it to be. And it's going to be running and defense. And I think they're trying to take a page out of the 49ers playbook and just run it down teams' throats. Because obviously they didn't draft a single wide receiver. Unless Jordan Love can play wideout, I don't really see how that the passing game is going to be much better. But I still think that I'm still giving credit to Aaron Rodgers being able to bring some of that magic back one more time, just to prove it, just to throw it in Matt LaFleur's face.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I was very tempted to go with that route. Like when before I started looking at things and writing it down, I had the Packers as my number 1 team in the division, and then I started thinking about it more, and I dropped them down. I mean, just to give you guys a hint, I have them actually as my number 3 team in this division. I have the Lions making a big jump this year. I think they were unlucky last season. They played half the year without Matthew Stafford, who at best is an all-pro quarterback, at worst is a solid top 12 quarterback in the NFL. And from week 4 on, they were 1-7 in one-score games. 1-7, and that's the type of thing that doesn't necessarily hold up from year to year, and especially doesn't hold up when you don't have when you get your perennial all-pro or your perennial Pro Bowl quarterback back. I believe that they've strengthened their running game, but the addition of DeAndre Swift, adding to Kerryon Johnson, who's going to be healthy this year. They have Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones. You have to think T.J. Hawkinson's going to take another step forward. Remember, he was a first-round draft pick last year at the tight end position. They spent a high draft pick on Jeff Okudah at the cornerback position, and they brought in Desmond Trufant in free agency, so they upgraded, at least seemingly anyway, potentially upgraded their secondary. And I was looking at their offensive line ranking. Pro Football Focus has them ranked at number 11 to go into the season. I just think that there's always teams that make a jump. Last year was the 49ers that made a big jump. And I'm just calling my shot right now. I think the Lions are a team that's going to surprise people. I'm not saying they're going to win the division, but I think they could win 8 to 10 games. And I kind of have the Packers in the same range in that 8 to 10 game wins, but I'm just giving the Lions the edge.
Wow, it's a hot take. We'll be revisiting that down the line, and we are recording this, just so you know. So this I don't know if you know, we were actually recording this whole broadcast. Yeah. So I went more chalk on this one. I have the Vikings at number 2 for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, I think Kirk Cousins is good, not great. I think Dalvin Cook is very good to great. They also, did you know Amir Abdullah is actually on the Vikings roster?
I did know that, but I forgot. I did know what I forgot. Yes. Mike
Boone took over for Dalvin Cook towards the end there with his injury. They still have Adam Thielen, who's got fantastic hands. I'm not really sure. I'm curious to see what Justin Jefferson does. Kyle Rudolph, I think, is a very, very underrated tight end. He's a great blocker. He's started to sneak up a little bit last year with a few more. He was a little more involved in the passing game. And their defense, is a very, very strong defense. So I think and then everything else that you already mentioned, I see no reason why they wouldn't be at least the second best team in that division. The Lions are not my third team. I actually have the Chicago Bears number 3 because I'm kind of thinking that I see Nick Foles being the starting quarterback of the Bears by, at worst, probably about week 5. And, Nick Foles isn't great, but I think he's better than Mitch Trubisky. And that team, if you remember, I think because of Trubisky's sort of very mediocre play and performance, you sort of forget how much talent is on that team. Tariq Cohen, David Montgomery's on that team. They still have Allen Robinson. They have Cordell Patterson. They have your old favorite guy, Ted Ginn Jr., who's still flying around. Do you know what year Ted Ginn was drafted, by the way? Pop quiz.
I want to say 2006.
2007. Good guess.
Oh, okay.
Anthony Miller's there. I mean, they've got, and then their defense is just it's good, and they signed Jimmy Graham. So I think if they have a little more stability at quarterback, and Nick Foles, I don't think is going to be. Nick Foles is obviously the wild card here. I mean, he could be MVP worthy, or he could be terrible. But I think Matt Nagy is sort of he's in that Andy Reid coaching tree, and so I think that, Andy Reid got the best out of Nick Foles, at least initially, and that was when he went. I think he had the best touchdown interception ratio until Brady broke it a couple years later, but I think it was like 27 touchdowns and 3 interceptions or something crazy.
Wasn't Chip Kelly the head coach of that team, not Andy Reid at that time?
I thought that was Andy Reid, but I might be wrong. But
it's okay.
Either way,
I'll look it up.
I think the Bears are definitely going to be in the 3rd spot in the division. I'm not sure. I think I see them as sort of a 9-7-ish team, which is good, not great. But I think they'll be over the 500 mark for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Bears to me, I have them as my 4th team, obviously, and I just look at them as not like all the pieces that you mentioned with David Montgomery, Tariq Cohen, Nick Foles, Mitch Trubisky. I just look at them as a below average. Like David Montgomery, I mean, we'll see he maybe takes a step forward in year 2. It was not impressive last year. Tariq Cohen wasn't as impressive as he had been last season. Allen Robinson is obviously a great wide receiver, and he's still a great wide receiver. They have a great defense. I just feel like they're pretty below average across the board on offense. So I don't know. But just to get to my 3rd team though, the Packers. Mm-hmm. So the opposite of the Lions, I believe the Packers were very lucky last season. They, as you pointed out, a week 13-3 team. And part of that, they were 8-1 in 1-score games in 2019, which, that happens when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback. Sometimes you win more of those 1-score games. They made no moves, no significant moves in the offseason. We all know how terrible a draft they had. And to me, in the NFL, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. They did nothing at all to get better this season. Nothing. And I just don't see, Aaron Rodgers, he was basically like close to average Rodgers last year. I mean, he was, 9th in completions, 11th in yards, 10th in touchdowns, 21st in completion percentage, 12th in passer rating. To me, Aaron Rodgers has to play at an MVP level for them to be a great team this year. And we haven't seen MVP level Aaron Rodgers since like 2016. So I don't have high expectations. I don't think there's necessarily like they're a bad team. I think that they overachieved last year, and they were basically kind of a slightly above average team that happened to win 13 games. I think they're going to be a slightly above average team this year and not win 13 games and be in that 8, 9, 10 win range. And I don't know. I'm not, and with the discontent of Aaron Rodgers, I'm looking at it the other way around. Like, yeah, he wants to go out and prove something. I'm kind of looking at it the other way around, where like this team just saw, we were one game from the Super Bowl, and our management didn't believe in us enough to reinvest. They decided to focus on the future because they didn't think that we were that we needed that. Because clearly you needed to get better. You got destroyed in the NFC Championship game, so clearly you needed to get better. But they chose not to focus on that, and to me, that could be a sign of what they think of overall of this roster. And so I'm not expecting good things or a good reaction from Aaron Rodgers or anyone on the team.
Just as a fact check, you were right. 2013 Nick Foles, that was Chip Kelly's first season. So it was he had 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, which Tom Brady later broke in 2016, 28 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Should be noted that Brady had about 700 more passing.
And just really quickly on the Bears, I mean, no need to beat a dead horse here. I just, to me, the Bears are just not a very good team. And I just don't know how many wins I can expect them to get. So I would think, 8 wins seems like a stretch for me. I think they would be more of a 5 to 6 win team in my opinion, and that's why I have them in last place in this division.
I have the Lions in last place. I'm not a Matt Patricia believer. I mean, we've seen a long line outside of Mike Flores in with the Dolphins. Even that's not proven yet. I mean, he still had a horrible record last year, but at least he looked promising. The Bill Belichick coaching tree has been lackluster, to be nice about it. Romeo Crennel was not a head coach. Charlie Weiss was not a head coach. Mike Vrabel's not really in the coaching tree. He happened to be on the Patriots, so he probably absorbed something, but I don't count him as necessarily a disciple of Bill Belichick.
Yeah, agreed.
Matt Patricia has a record of he's 9-22-1. I mean, that's bad. That's real bad. And they were 6-10 last year. DeAndre Swift is a great addition. I mean, he's fun. It's a fun piece. But if you look at that team from top to bottom, you really can't point out any serious flaws. I mean, they lost Darius Slay, which hurts them on defense a bit, but he's still he's one cornerback, and I'm not really sure that that's enough one way or the other. I don't necessarily see it. They drafted who's there, Jeff Okudah, so he replaces Darius Slay, no problem. Their wide receivers core is decent. It's not great. They picked up Geronimo Allison from the Packers. They still have Kenny Golladay. They have Marvin Jones. Danny Amendola is still floating around. Who knew that? But it's sort of just average at best. And Matt Stafford's sort of like, I put him. He's like a younger Tony Romo. He's got great regular season numbers, but he just kind of falls on his face. When it matters. And I don't see Matt Patricia being the kind of guy that can get any more out of Matt Stafford than we've already seen, healthy or not. So, it's just we definitely decidedly differ in this division. So I have the Packers, the Vikings, the Bears third, and the Lions fourth. You have the Vikings first, the Lions second, the Packers third, and the Bears fourth.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I can take from both of our comments about this division, we don't think this division is very strong. No. Right, like we think that basically the winner of the division is going to be slightly above average, and then everyone else is going to be.
I don't think right a wild card team. There will be a wild card team coming out of the NFC North.
I at least at this point, I think I agree. When we get to that stage where we put together our playoff bracket, I guess I'll take another look at it. But I would say I agree with you at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we do reserve the right to revisit this at least once before the season starts. To kind of.
Who knows? I may come to my senses,
Yeah, I mean, you might start actually watching an old Lions game or something and see how crazy that sounds. But that's fine. I mean, it is what it makes.
You can't just go all chalk in the NFL. You can't go all chalk. You have to take chances.
Make sports fun. So that should be interesting. And we will revisit this. We're not going to be one of those shows or hosts and co-hosts that sort of change our opinions every other show and kind of just say, well, see, we told you. We're going to own. If we make a mistake, we're going to own it. And certainly if we make a good prediction, we're definitely going to remind you. Yeah. So we need all the validation we can get at this point. So moving on, let's move to the AFC North. And right off the bat, if you don't have the Ravens as the number one team in that division, Jose, I think we might just cut the broadcast right here and go home.
No, I definitely have the Ravens as the number one team. And I'll just keep going here. I have the Ravens as the number one team, and I have them as one of the best teams in the NFL this year. I think we're looking at a 12, 13, 14 win team. I mean, they were amazing on offense. They basically kept everyone and then got better on defense. So, I mean, the retirement of Marcel Yanda at guard, he's an 8-time Pro Bowler, including last season. That's a huge blow to the offensive line, especially in a team that likes to run the ball so much. But they drafted J.K. Dobbins, going to make it better, make the running back room better. They added Devin Duvernay to the wide receiver core, which you have to imagine is going to be better with having Marquise Brown healthy for a full season and Miles Boykin. Then they drafted Patrick Queen, who I'm already hearing comparisons to Ray Lewis and how good he's going to be. Now, I know that's kind of what happens when a guy hasn't played any games yet, but I just, my point is, and they also added Calais Campbell, who's got 39 sacks over the last 4 seasons. They just have a great team from top to bottom. Not a lot of holes. Baltimore is going to dominate this year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, everything you said. They still have Earl Thomas, provided he doesn't get shot by his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Mark Andrews. I don't know if you remember Mark Andrews was phenomenal tight end last year. They went Nick Boyle, Mark Andrews. They had sort of a 2 tight end set that was dangerous. And, Gus Edwards was good. Justice Hill, if you remember, was sort of a great change-up to Mark Ingram. And I think what goes underrated or unnoticed a little bit is that, having Robert Griffin III as your backup to Lamar Jackson is a pretty good comp. You don't have to – Lamar Jackson's such a special player. And, I actually just rewatched the game where they got blown out by the Titans last season in their playoff loss. But there was a couple plays where Lamar Jackson took the game. He was running the ball, and his moves. They were Barry Sanders-esque. The stopping, the cutting. He made one guy look so silly. I laughed out loud. I was like, oh my god, that's a professional athlete. And so to have somebody like Robert Griffin III, who was sort of what everybody, Lamar Jackson is what people expected Robert Griffin III to be before he got injured, I think is a great insurance policy. And I feel like that's, in the NFL, that's it. You get one key injury and all of a sudden your entire season is changed. So there's little things like that. And just going through their schedule, and I know I only want to do this for the Ravens because they were 14-2 last year. And I don't think that they're going to be 14-win team this year. I could see them more like 12, maybe 13. But I just wanted to kind of like run through their schedule really quickly and just kind of go through who, just real rapid fire kind of wins and losses.
Mm-hmm.
So week 1, they're at the Browns.
Win.
Week 2, they're at the Texans.
Probably a win. But
I get that a win too. Yeah.
Yeah.
3, they're at the Chiefs. They're home to the Chiefs.
I would give them a loss there, but it wouldn't be unbelievable for them to win either. So.
Week 4, they're at the Redskins. Win.
Yeah.
They're home to the Bengals. Week 5. Win. They're at the Eagles.
That's a win.
I'm going to give them a win. So that's 6. Then they're home to the Steelers.
It's probably a win, but you're going to have to give them a couple division losses just because.
I'm going to throw that as a win. They're home. I feel like the home team. Then they're at the Colts.
I think the Colts will be better this year, but it's still going to be a win.
I agree. That's 8. Then they're at the Patriots. That's a win.
Yeah.
They're home to the Titans.
You would think it's a win, but at some point, I think we already have them winning. You already have them winning so many games right now. So
they're at 9 wins right now.
Yeah. You would have to
revenge game. So I'm giving that's a win. Then the Steelers, I'm going to say they split. I'll give that a loss. They're home to the Cowboys. That's a win.
Yeah.
They're at the Browns.
Probably a win.
The Browns did beat them up pretty good. I think that might be a loss, honestly.
Okay. I'd say you have to give them a couple losses in the division. Yeah. So
then they're home to the Jaguars. That's a win.
Yeah.
Home to the Giants. Win. And then finally they end the season at the Bengals. Win. So that's.
Although who knows where they're going to? Maybe the Bengals steal a win just because maybe
because the Ravens have given up by that point.
Yeah.
So actually, that puts us right at 14. That's 14 wins. So yeah, maybe they are going to be a 14-win team.
I think they're at that range, that 12 to 14 win range. In order to win 14 games, some things have to go right that maybe aren't in your control. So they're going to have a couple balls bounce their way to win 14 or more games. But I don't see any universe in which they win fewer than 12.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent.
So who'd you have as your second team?
So second, this was difficult. I will tell you, it was between the Browns and the Steelers, and ultimately, I'm going to give the nod to the Browns, because I think Baker Mayfield is going to show up. I think he's actually, he had a comment earlier this week about how he's kind of keeping his mouth shut this year and not talking as much, and I think that's a good sign of his maturity. And you look at guys like Cam Newton, his first season he blew up, his second season he regressed, his third season he blew up. And there's a bunch of other examples like that. But just the talent, I think that the draft they had this year and the acquisitions they made have made this team almost flawless from top to bottom. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt as a 1-2 punch is just silly as a running back combination. You know, they have Odell Beckham, they have Jarvis Landry, they signed Austin Hooper. They still have, as far as I know, they still have David Njoku.
Yep.
And their defense is I mean, Myles Garrett, presuming he plays some of the year, is going to be incredibly dominant. There's really no holes that you can find. They still have, you know, Ward as their cornerback.
Yep.
And I don't know. I don't see where this team has a significant Achilles heel.
Yeah, I'm with you right there. I think the Browns are definitely the second best team in the division, and I think they're going to be a playoff team this season for the first time in forever for the Browns. You know, they just didn't have a good year last year. You know, sometimes just things don't happen, that just don't work out well. Baker was talking, you had Odell Beckham Jr. and his drama coming in. It just, Freddie Kitchens being over his head.
Completely forgot about Freddie.
Yeah.
Freddie Kitchens was a big reason. The dumping Freddie Kitchens in favor of Kevin Stefanski should not go unnoticed.
Yeah, and I think this is a small number, but one of the things when you have a team that seemingly has a lot of talent, but doesn't win the way you expect them to, I look at the fourth quarter. And I say, what was happening in the fourth quarter of these games? Because that's usually where the money making time is a lot of times, and when good teams find a way to close out not as good teams. And the Browns were outscored 99-71 in the fourth quarter of all their games last year. Not a huge gap, but enough when you consider they were 6-10 last year. And if that score is flipped around, maybe they're 10-6 instead of 6-10.
Yep.
And I believe in Baker Mayfield. I think he has superstar ability. I've been telling you this since before he was drafted. But this is a prove it year for him. And I think they are going to come out and prove it. I look at this team as kind of a post-hype sleeper. They were all hyped up last year and they fell flat. This is the year that people are kind of not even talking about them, and I think they're going to come out and be around a 10-11 win team.
Yep. No, I think that they're gonna. I'm surprised we're even on that, but
yep.
I have the Steelers at 3, which shouldn't be super surprising. And I would have, had the Steelers been smart and signed Cam Newton as their backup, I think I would have had them higher. But Ben Roethlisberger is coming off a season-ending injury at 38 years old, I think he is.
Yep.
And he's proven that he doesn't really have the off-season dedication to that Tom Brady has, or he just doesn't take care of himself quite to the level you might expect a professional athlete would. And so it's you might be in a position where it's like you're putting your team's future on the back of Duck Hodges again, and it's just silly. But their defense is incredible. I mean, the addition of Minkah Fitzpatrick last year, he had 5 interceptions. He was playing at just at like an MVP level. I mean, not that a safety would ever really win MVP, but maybe Defensive Player of the Year level. TJ Watt might have been the best linebacker in the league last year. I mean, he was just if you watch games with him in it, he is a force. He lives up to his namesake. But it's James Conner needs to be healthy. I think that's important. And I think that the addition of Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame, who I think I mentioned last week, the Steelers have an uncanny ability to just draft good wide receivers. It's just go through their history. They seem to get the most. I don't know whether it's the way they draft or just the schemes that they use, but they seem to create very good wide receivers. And so I think Chase Claypool is going to be a superstar on that team at least. And I think they're. It's hard to put them third, but I think that's what's going to happen because they don't have the same amount of talent from top to bottom as the Browns do.
Yeah, and I have the same thing as you. The Steelers in third. I'm not really a big Ben Roethlisberger fan this year. I don't believe in Ben, and honestly, this is a little bit beyond just what we're talking about now. I've never really considered Ben Roethlisberger like this amazingly great quarterback. I just have considered him a pretty good quarterback that's always been on really good teams. And that's fine. It's not saying he's a bad quarterback, but I don't look at him as the type of guy who's going to a team and elevating that team. I look at him as a guy who's just going to come in, and kind of do his job, and he might have a good season, he might not. There's no Antonio Brown. There's no Le'Veon Bell. They have a lot of young, promising pieces, like Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, James Conner. And you mentioned Chase Claypool. His comparison, I don't know if you saw this, but his combine numbers, they were comparing him to Calvin Johnson. Not that
really
he had, not that he had Calvin Johnson production in college, but just as from like an athletic measurable standpoint, from like height and its weight and speed and all that stuff, he measured, he compared to Megatron. So that's always a good thing.
High praise.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be a decent team. I just think they're going to struggle to get on a consistent roll. I think they might win 2 or 3 games and look, oh wow, this is a really good team, and then they'll lose 3 games. And you're like, what happened? And I think that's what happens to teams that aren't that good and are just kind of average. And so, I mean, they do have a great defense. I think they have an average offense that has, potential to get better. I think the best thing that would happen to them is that they lose like all their games this year and can draft a good quarterback in the first round next season. But yeah, I'm seeing them cap out around 8 wins this year.
All right, so that leaves us with the lowly Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah,
and it's hard. I think if the Bengals maybe were in a different division, or if the Bengals hadn't gotten rid of Andy Dalton, and Andy Dalton was going to be starting the season, but to put a rookie quarterback, I mean, there's enough pressure on Joe Burrow to come in starting for the Bengals alone on a normal season. But now you talk about it's with COVID-19. There's teams can't meet with each other. They can't spend time with each other. They're missing all of this offseason, which to veterans, is sort of a wash after a couple of years. But I mean, to a rookie quarterback who's going to be starting day one, that's a huge step backwards. I mean, and I think in that division it's going to be too hard for them. I mean, they do have a decent team around Joe Burrow, which, mm-hmm. I mean, Joe Mixon is still there. I mean, we forget about him. Giovanni Bernard's still there. I mean, who remembers him? Tyler Boyd. They have. I mean, there's a list of talent on that team, but I just don't think that they're going to be able to put it together.
Yeah, and there's no secret that they're in rebuilding mode, right? Like there's literally no chance they win more than 4 or 5 games next year. They
draft T. Higgins, by the way. I mean, yeah. The addition of Clemson's T. Higgins, and I think A.J. Green is a giant wild card. I mean, is he going to be healthy? If he's healthy, then maybe that helps. But
honestly, if he's healthy and playing well, they should trade him in the middle of the season and get a draft pick for him. Like this is not a year that they're going to be going in and try and win 10, 11 games. They're not positioned to do that. All the reasons you mentioned, they're not a very good team. They have a brand new quarterback. They haven't had the benefit of they're not going to have had the benefits of the OTAs and all the different training camp. And I know they're doing virtual mini camps and things like that. I can't imagine that it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They have some decent players on defense and Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins, but I don't think it's necessarily just about this division. I don't see them, whether they were in this division or any division, I just don't see them winning a lot of games this year. I think they're going to be a team that is competing for the number 1 or number 2 pick overall next season, except they won't have to draft a quarterback. So they might be in a position where they can trade down and get a whole bunch more picks and really kind of accelerate their franchise's growth.
So here's a question before we go to break. If you're the Bengals and you do exactly what you did this last year in 2019 and you just completely just suck and are the worst team in the league, you have the number 1 pick next year. You just drafted Joe Burrow number 1. What do you do with that number 1 pick next year?
Oh, I trade back. I mean, assuming that Joe Burrow looks like an NFL quarterback, obviously there's that, right? But and there's no career-ending injury. I mean, Joe Burrow just had the greatest season in college football history at the quarterback position, right? So, and he's won a national championship, and he's got a Heisman Trophy. Like, there's not really a lot that's wrong with him. But you could be giving up on the next Peyton Manning. In theory, yeah. we don't know that. I mean, sure. I just think, you could be giving up. I just think the cost of wasting the draft pick, unless you can find a way to trade Joe Burrow and get first round value back, and I mean high, and not like the 27th pick. I'm talking like top 10 pick, first round value back. It doesn't make sense from a team building franchise. When you pick a quarterback number 1 overall, you basically need to be all in on him for at least 2 or 3 years. And I just think if they get the number 1 pick this year, I'm not really good at like doing the math of like how you trade picks or whatever like that, but you've got to think they'd be able to get 2 or 3 first round picks, the first round pick.
The kind of season that Joe Burrow would have if they were able to trade him, I think. But
that's true too. And also, it depends on the season that Trevor Lawrence has, or whomever, insert whoever the first round pick is, the first overall pick. But yeah, I can't imagine a situation where I'd be moving on from Joe Burrow after 1 year, after investing a first overall pick on him.
Very interesting. All right, well, we're up against the clock, so we're going to take a break. So just to clear up, we differed wildly in the NFC North. I had Packers, Vikings, Bears, Lions. You had Vikings, Lions, Packers, Bears, and then we agreed top to bottom on the AFC North: Ravens, Browns, Steelers, Bengals.
See, I'm not that crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, you came to your senses towards the back end of that segment. But coming up next, to round out the show, we stopped. We both checked out the Lance Armstrong Part 1 of the documentary on ESPN, basically because there's nothing else on TV involving sports, so we watched it. So we're going to come back and kind of break that down a little bit. So this is the Benchwarmerz podcast. I'm Lou, that's Jose, and we will be right back.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Now available on iHeartRadio and Spotify. This is the Benchwarmers Podcast. Here's Lou and Jose.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. I'm Lou, that's Jose. This is the Benchwarmers Podcast. You can come find us. We're on iHeartRadio. We're on Spotify. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. The Benchwarmers Podcast at yahoo.com. If you want to hit us up and let us know how we're doing, or tell Jose how crazy he is for some of his rankings, feel free to give us a shout. But finally, to round out this week's show, Jose, since the Last Dance Jordan documentary is now in the books, the next up seems to be the Lance Armstrong documentary. This is only going to be a 2-part series. They're 2 hours apiece. We saw part 1 last week, and I just wanted to get your initial reactions because, we kind of grew up in this. I mean, we were in this time period, and so I don't know. Did you have one of the Live Strong bracelets? Did you ever wear one of those?
No, I didn't have a Live Strong bracelet.
Me neither.
And one of the things that I commented on, as I was taking notes while I was watching it, I feel bad, but I never really cared about Lance Armstrong.
Really?
When I was younger, I'm not saying I disliked him or anything. I wasn't I hate Lance Armstrong. But for whatever reason, maybe because he was a cycler, bicycler,
Yeah.
I was aware of him obviously, but I was whatever. I just was never a huge Lance Armstrong guy. At least I don't remember myself being that way. So when I first heard about the documentary, I was I really don't care. He's he's not relevant anymore. The difference between Jordan is still relevant, right? Lance Armstrong is not, and I felt like they were trying to make him relevant with this documentary. Mm-hmm. But I will say, after watching it, it did feel very honest and genuine. I appreciated the cyclists talking about doping in such an open way. In the Tour de France and how basically everyone's we started right away. If you weren't doping, you weren't participating. And I was whoa. It actually made me want to watch, if they could find a way to do this, a documentary of the steroid age in baseball, because that's kind of what my mind kept going to. He was we were doing so well, and all of a sudden I'm regressing. And why am I regressing? Well, you're regressing because all these other guys are taking EPO, and you're not.
That was that was one thing that actually started this whole train of thought in my head, and it sort of does apply to baseball in a lot of respects, because it was the same. I was thinking about Lance Armstrong, and I was sort of thinking about Barry Bonds a little bit at the same time, because it's funny you say that he was honest. I mean, I guess maybe the cyclists were honest, but it feels like Lance doesn't have a great self-awareness. It felt like he's still. Like, even watching something that's supposed to be a documentary, you could still see him trying to frame and spin the narrative sort of in his direction, which I guess anybody would do in that situation, but it seemed less of an admission and more of just like well, no, but if you look at it this way kind of thing. But that being said, I do think that there is an interesting debate to be had, because it's baseball is more purist, so I feel, and baseball, more people care about baseball, for being honest, in America. But cycling, if you look at just what you said, everybody's telling you that everyone is on EPO, everyone is using some kind of performance enhancement. So if the entire league is using this, then it sort of takes away the competitive advantage. So everybody's back on an level playing field again, albeit an elevated playing field, but it's still a level playing field. And here's a guy who, goes through testicular cancer, goes through chemotherapy, it metastasizes. I mean, all the amount of insanity that he went through, and then came back and was the greatest athlete in his sport ever. I don't know that I really am that I don't really chastise him that much, because it's like, I look at Barry Bonds the same way, and I know baseball is more, it's more, the records are hallowed and the history of baseball, blah, blah, blah. But, if you look at if the majority of people during that year, that era, the steroid era, we call it a steroid era. So a lot of people were on steroids. So if you have, we have pitchers and we have hitters that were admittedly on steroids, who got caught using steroids. If everybody's sort of on the same level playing field, only one of them hit 73 home runs in a season. Barry Bonds still did it, regardless of how you want to say, well, he was artificially enhanced or whatever. But in that time, so were the people throwing to him. So that negates, in my mind, the advantage. So if everybody was hitting 70 home runs, then fine. You could say, all right, well, clearly. But this guy was in an era of superhero performances. He was the best of the superheroes. So it's hard for me to really to really criminalize him for it. I don't know. It's just it's probably an unpopular opinion, but it's how I genuinely feel. I'm not just saying that to like get clicks.
Well, you and I have agreed on this. I've never really been like, oh my God, they did steroids, how horrible. Like I just was, I ask myself the same question all the time, right? If I could take a pill that would make me 10 times better at my job, or even 10%, as they said in the documentary, right? That basically EPO gave you a 10% increase. Yep. If it would be 10% better at my job and it was safe, would you take it? Yeah, I would take it. And I think most people would. And I just, you mentioned the part of how being the greatest cyclist of all time. They had someone, I can't remember his name, but they had someone on the show or the movie who was considered at that time the greatest cyclist of all time. And then they had to say that basically everyone was cheating. So I was like, well, does that mean he was cheating, but they just didn't catch him?
I think is who you're...
I'm sorry?
Greg LeMond, I think is who you're...
Oh, no, that's the American. That was the American. But there was a French bicyclist who had won like 4 or 5 in a row in the 70s or something like that. And it was like, okay, well, basically all these cyclists were saying they started cheating basically the minute they became professionals, right? So that means there was an expectation for that to happen. Well, where does that expectation come from? It comes from it being established by the professionals who were already there. So this is something that seems like maybe unlike baseball. It seems like this was like, if you're going to do the Tour de France, you have no choice but to do this because you're not going to be able to make it. Now, in fairness, there were some people who said that they were clean. I don't know. I mean, I guess we have to believe them, based on just giving them the benefit of the doubt. But I always say, like, just because you didn't get caught doesn't mean you didn't do it. And that's my issue with baseball as well, where like you have these you can't be in the Hall of Fame because you were doing steroids, but you don't know who was and who wasn't doing steroids. And so many players are saying everyone was doing it. So who do we believe? The clean guys were saying, I wasn't doing it, and there were a bunch of guys who wasn't doing it, or the guys who were using the steroids and saying this was going on everywhere. It was rampant.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I would expect people to kind of always say that they weren't doing it. But if you have people that are, I mean, it was a Game of Shadows by Jose Canseco. I mean, that book sort of just broke open that entire era. And it's, I mean, if you just look at pictures, I mean, the eye test alone, I mean, some of those pictures, you can see it. I mean, you can just see the difference in physical stature. And so,
just a fact check there. Game of Shadows was by Mark Fennerata. Juiced is the book that was by Jose Canseco. Just I know that was like a little mental cramp there. I just wanted to throw it out there. No, just fine. No. I had a mess up earlier too, so this is why we're here to help each other.
Better you correct me now than I get 100 pounds later. But Lance, in terms of the thing with Lance is, I think that. All right, well, let me ask you. If Lance Armstrong did this, okay, he admits that he does EPO, he goes on Oprah and everything, but I think what really ostracized him from society is the fact that he lied about it, and not just lied about it, but he went out of his way to try to destroy people that were trying to out him because he was so protective of his name and his legacy. And how would we view Lance Armstrong today if he went through what he went through? He was cycling, he got cancer, he came back, he won all those titles, he admitted to doping and never lied about it. If he got caught and said, you know what, I had cancer, I wanted to get in my sport, I wanted to be part of this, being a professional athlete, I wanted to be the best, and this was the only way I could do it, and so I did it. And I'm sorry.
We probably would view him the same way we view A-Rod right now. Not so
about it too.
But then, I mean, everyone lies about it initially, right? No one's like, yeah, I did steroids. Like, everyone has an initial lie where they say, no, I didn't do it.
Andy Pettit comes to mind because Andy Pettit admitted, he sort of downplayed it and said, well, I only used it once for an injury, an elbow injury or something. But he never lied about it. Like, he got caught.
Let me ask you a question. Do you really think he only did it once? It just happened to be that one time that he did lie. No, he did lie. I can't prove that he lied, but on some level, I mean, Barry Bonds has never said he's done it at all. Okay. Barry Bonds' head grew 3 times its size. But Barry Bonds doesn't have a failed drug test.
Yeah, no, I mean, true. Again, it's hard to you can't say it for sure, but it's. But Andy Pettit did admit it, and we don't bring up his name nearly as much as anyone else in that sport, especially Barry Bonds.
Well, I think you're right.
Maybe it's because of the records, but I mean...
Andy Pettit's a nice guy, right? So you're not going to go going after him, and you're going to give him the benefit of the doubt when he says, oh, I only did steroids 1 or 2 times to get back from an injury, and I just happened to get caught those 1 or 2 times, right? You give him the benefit of the doubt, you look the other way. Barry Bonds is not a nice guy. You're right. It's when you're not a nice person, people don't give you the benefit of the doubt. People don't look the other way. People don't give you a pass. Lance Armstrong. Now, also, it does matter that the records that you're going after, right? Andy Pettit was a great pitcher, but he was never threatening any sort of hollowed all-time great records.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think from that standpoint, and him being such a nice guy, seems like let's just give Andy Pettit a break. At the same time, I'm not sure if Andy Pettit's going to get into the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
And if he were up for the Hall of Fame, I don't know if it would be any different. And as far as like lying or not lying, I don't really know what guys are supposed to do, right? They said if Roger Clemens went all the way to Congress to try and defend himself, and people still think he's lying. Once, especially in our culture, once people have made up their opinion about you, it's very difficult to change the verdict in the court of public opinion.
Yeah. I mean, he did say that his trainer misremembered something, so he does get credit for creating a word.
Yeah.
If nothing else. So at least at least he got that out of it. But yeah, I don't know. I think it is true, and a lot of it is speculative. But there is some, it's not necessarily, it isn't a court of law. It's a court of public opinion, just like you said. Empirical evidence is enough sometimes. You don't necessarily need proof beyond a shadow of a doubt, because we don't need that to convict them in our eyes or our opinion. So
yeah. And I do think what you said about Lance Armstrong trying to hurt people to protect his image, that certainly is not playing well with anyone, right? That's going to certainly put you on the I hate you list. But my last thought with to kind of bring it back to the beginning when he said, like, every time he expects someone to say, "Hey Lance, F you," right? I was like, if I saw Lance Armstrong, I wouldn't even care. Like, I would be like, whatever, who cares? It's Lance Armstrong. Move on. Like, I don't know why people have such rage and hatred towards him. It's cycling. Come on.
I think that it's it is funny how how our view of people changes depending on how we think of them from a personality standpoint. Because you remember, Peyton Manning had a PED scandal after he had his neck surgeries.
Oh, yeah.
He had all the exactly. All his, stuff was sent to his wife from Germany or something, and it was
that's right,
growth hormone or something, and there's all this, and it sort of just went away because he made a bunch of funny commercials with Brad Paisley, and we didn't, he hosted SNL, and we don't really, he does a good job with Peyton's Places on ESPN, and we don't, he's just a funny, aw shucks, happy-go-lucky guy who, is whatever, and so. It is interesting how our own opinions of people, whether we like them before or after all their stuff, before all their controversy, affects how we see them after it. And Lance, I'm very curious to see how part 2 comes out. I want to see sort of. I think the biggest issue is that people feel lied to. Because the Livestrong thing, the Livestrong Foundation, I mean, almost outshined Lance Armstrong. It became such a phenomenon that. And they eventually they dissociated themselves from Lance Armstrong because of everything that was happening. And I think that was for the best. But people that got behind that with all the Livestrong bracelets and everything, and people just felt like they were just the wool was pulled over their eyes. And I guess to some extent it was. But it's still, there's a lot of people who have had cancer. And there's not many people that have had cancer and then went on to win 7 Tour de France. I mean, he still did, and what he did was still an amazing feat.
Absolutely.
So I'm not quite as harsh about it. I don't like that he lied about it. I think lying is what put him over the top for me. That's where my anger would stem from. Not that he did it, but that he lied about it.
Agreed.
So, all right, we got to get out of here. We are all done. So another week in the books, Jose. Job well done. And so this is still in the era of COVID with no sports or minimal sports. We have somehow filled up another sports talk show. And so good job to us. Good job to you if you're still listening. And you can find us, again, one more time. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us on Spotify. We have we're part of the iHeartRadio podcasting lineup, the Benchwarmerz podcast. And then the Benchwarmerz podcast at yahoo.com if you want to send us some love mail, hate mail, whatever you feel. Benchwarmerz with a Z. So we're going to keep trying to make the show a little bit better every week, and we appreciate you tuning in. So for Jose Ortiz, I am Lou Ruggieri, and we will see you next time on the Benchwarmerz podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Benchwarmers Podcast. Follow along with us on the Benchwarmers Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to review us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.